Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing a book called Day Boy. It's written by Trent Jamieson. This book is the most unique take on a vampire novel I think I've ever read. It's quite an amazing book. So it's set in a dystopian world. This world has elements of, a Western style theme. It's got a more modern type theme as well. Not as modern as modern day, but there are just so many different themes going through this book to make up this dystopian world. And just the way the character also builds the vampires and the humans in this book and in this world is so unique. I was blown away by this book, and it's the first book I've ever read by Trent Jamieson, but it won't be the last, because now I want to read every book by this author. Here's the book. The cover drew me first. Just something about the cover just drew me into it. And then when I read the blurb, I was blown away. It just sounded so amazing. And I'm so glad I read this because the book is as good as the blurb promised. And you don't always get that with books. Let's dive into the book more now. As I mentioned just earlier, this dystopian world is very unique. And it's the most unique vampire novel I've read, I think, out of all the books I've read about vampires. So the vampires are the masters. There was a great war. I'm not sure how big the war was. You don't get a sense of how big the war was, but it was big enough to change the world significantly. Vampires are the masters, and the humans are not really fodder. In some senses they are fodder. The vampires feed on humans. And we find in this book that some vampires try to feed on other animals, and it leads them to go a bit crazy and desperate. So they have to feed on humans. There are some humans called day boys, and they're servants for the vampires or the masters. And it's almost like an apprenticeship type system that goes on. So they start out and they're trained when they're around about 10 or just below, it seems. And then they're a day boy until they're maybe in their late teens. And then they go off to do something else. Sometimes they get a choice of what to do. Sometimes it's chosen for them. So that's how the relationship between the day boys and the vampires happens in this book. And the day boys are like their servants. So they run all their errands, do all the housework outside and inside the house. They do errands for humans that the vampires have agreements with to drink their blood. So on days where a vampire will come and drink that person's blood, the day boy does all chores for them for a day, helps them out. So they don't have to go and do things themselves for a while. And that was quite a unique relationship in this book. Most of this story takes place in a small town called Midfield, and it's out in the country somewhere. The focus of the story is Mark. Now, Mark is our main character, and he's a day boy for a vampire called Dale. The relationship between Mark and Dale is quite unique and just really engrossing. It really draws you into both of them. Both the characters have a lot of light and shade, and especially the vampire character. He's not all evil. He comes across as very human in some ways as well, but he's not always good. So he does some really good things for Mark in the book, but can also be quite tough and quite cruel when he needs to be. Mark is a bit of a boundary pusher. He's not happy in his role. You don't get the impression that he's totally happy. And he pushes the boundaries and always gets into trouble. And there's always warnings to Mark throughout the book. You're a day boy at the moment. If you get into trouble, you're protected a bit. Once you finish being a day boy, you won't have that protection. So you better watch out. And there's always these hidden threats and kind of things going his way. He doesn't take heed of them, and he always pushes the boundaries, always gets into trouble. There are some times where he almost dies. He's rescued. And then Dale, the vampire, forgives him, tells him not to do it again, knows he will anyway, but forgives him because he knows Mark's character. But he just keeps on warning him, just think about what you're going to be in your future. If you keep playing up like this, your future is not going to be as good as you think it might be. Under the surface of this story, it's also a coming-of-age story for Mark. Coming of age into an adult. So from being a day boy, a servant, into being an adult, free to do what he wants. Maybe he gets a choice, maybe he doesn't. It depends on a lot of things about how he acts in his last year. It depends on how his master feels about him, how he can support him. All those type of things play into it. And I really enjoyed this whole book. I thought everything about it was just brilliant. The writing is so good. The characters are all built up so well. They all feel so lifelike. They're all given so much flesh in the book. You can feel like you can see them. You just know so much about them. Even though it's a fairly short book, it's just over 300 pages, the author crams so much in there about characters, and they're all written so perfectly. The other thing I like about this book is, while Mark and his vampire master are the main focus of the story, the author also draws other characters into the story so well and gives them so much life and makes them important for the scenes they're in. And they don't slink into the background. When characters are drawn into scenes, they come out of the background into the forefront so much, and they're so colourful and so vivid. And we learn so much about them. Even the smaller characters, we learn so much about them, and I just feel like I can picture them. You close your eyes and you can feel like you can picture those characters, that you've known them for so long. That's just such a great sign of brilliant writing. Mark, who's our main character, and in his last year of being a day boy for a vampire called Dane, he's just a really wonderfully drawn character. Everything about him is so lifelike. I love the fact that he's this larrikin character. You know, he wants to break the rules a bit. He wants to push those edges out, those boundaries out. He wants to do as much as he can. He's not happy with a life that has so many constraints. He has the comforts of being a day boy, so being a servant for a vampire. He's got extra comforts, and he's got extra security as well, but it's like he's not happy with that. He still wants his own freedom. He still wants to be an individual, and that's just carried through this book so cleverly. And this character just stands out as being such a brilliantly written character. Mark also has some great character growth in this novel, and everything about that character growth makes sense. That's also a sign of a great character. When the character growth makes sense, everything is consistent with the character, everything they do, all their motivations make sense. It just shows you the author's got a great grasp of how to write characters. Dane, who's Mark's master, he's a vampire. He's a very complex character, and he's got a lot of depth, so he can be cruel. You know, he can show his strength, and he needs to drink blood, so he's got that bloodthirst in him, and he can be cruel to people if he needs to be. But he can also be very kind and be a great protector. And there are so many moments in this book where you're just wondering, is Dane going to punish Mark for doing something wrong? You know, is Dane going to get angry? What's going to happen? But he draws himself in, and he's kind, and he's forgiving, and he's got so much humanity in those scenes. And I think there are a lot of scenes in this book where Dane shows much more humanity than some of the humans in the town of Midfield. And that's very clever in this book, because it throws a whole different unique light on the vampires and humans in this dystopian world. Anne is another human in the town of Midfield, and she's a girl about Mark's age, and a girl that Mark has a crush on. And you get the sense in this book that they're in love a bit, but they can never be together. Things keep them apart. The fact that Mark's a day boy keeps them apart. The fact that Anne is a musician also keeps them apart. Because what we learn in this book is the vampires in this world treasure music, and it's treasured quite highly. And Anne, being a brilliant piano player, she's got a future ahead of her. And in her future, she could be shipped off to a big city somewhere and become a great musician and be revered by vampires. The thing that comes through so strongly about Anne is her spark, her zest for life. That just comes through so strongly. She's got this courage about her. She's got this strong conviction about what she wants to do, who she wants to be. And that comes through in every scene she's in. She's not apologetic for who she is. She's strong, she's stubborn, she knows what she wants, and she doesn't need to apologise to anybody for being who she is. Day Boy by Trent Jamieson is a brilliant book. Everything about it is just so wonderfully written. Characters, the world he creates, the uniqueness of this world. I've not read a vampire novel like this before. I rate it a 5 out of 5, and this makes me want to read everything written by this author. It's not often you read a book by an author where After one book, you want to read everything else that's written by the author. It doesn't happen with every author, but this book is so brilliant. It makes me hungry to read the rest of his books. On my channel, I do review fantasy novels. Check out my fantasy playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.